on sword attempt to try and kill him, and he approaches him. Now, earlier in the episode, it's important to note, we get a very cool scene with Arya in the library with some White Walkers walking around, and this was very reminiscent of the first Jurassic Park. Now, if you've seen the first Jurassic Park, one of the most famous scenes of that movie and one of the most iconic scenes actually in cinema history is when they're in the kitchen and they're hiding behind just anything that they can find, and there's some raptors in the kitchen. And even though Jurassic Park is this big dinosaur movie with a lot going on, these big battles, we get a very contained and claustrophobic scene with our characters hiding from these velociraptors that are just stalking them, but they don't know where they are, and they're just going around the kitchen and trying to find them. It was very similar to Arya in this episode, as she is hiding from these White Walkers and just going from like bookshelf to bookshelf hiding, and you kind of get to see that there's a lot of White Walkers here. She eventually goes to hide under the table, and similar to Jurassic World, in our visual cue when the T-Rex walks up and we see the glass of water start to shake, rather, well, I don't know if it's as similar to that, but similar in the terms of the liquid cue that kind of changes everything. Arya starts bleeding from her forehead, and it drips on the floor below, and that noise signal kind of indicates to the White Walkers that someone is there. A similar visual cue, I guess you could say, make the parallel in the original Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, the first one. There's a scene when the Green Goblin, played by Willem Dafoe, but obviously why is his name escaping me? Norman Osborn is in the kitchen with Peter's family having dinner or whatever, and Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is actually on the ceiling, and he's bleeding from his forehead, and the blood drips below onto the table, and Norman Osborn sees that, looks up, Peter's gone in the time that it happened. Very similar in this episode, Arya's bleeding from her forehead, the blood drips below. It's that sound cue for the White Walkers, because they're very sound sensitive, and they go to look under the table, and she's gone. So I thought that was kind of a cool parallel. Obviously, probably not on purpose to make that type of connection and callback to Spider-Man. I really don't think that there's much parallels between Spider-Man and Game of Thrones, but nonetheless, I thought it was a very cool visual cue because it made that scene feel very claustrophobic, because in a episode that was very much this giant battle, this grand scale, this took 11 weeks to shoot, 90 hours for the battle sequence alone. I thought it was nice to get that scene where we're very contained in this library area with Arya and just a couple White Walkers roaming around. After that, she escapes all that. Melisandre gives her motivation. So does Beric. And she goes and she gets all the way to the Godswood somehow, pounces on the Night King as he goes to reach for his blade, presumably either to kill Bran, or I was hoping he was going to take a knee and, give his loyalty to Bran, because I subscribe to the theory that Bran was the Night King, or there was something beyond there with Bran and the Night King, that they had some sort of connection. I don't know what I was hoping for, just hoping for some sort of big reveal with the Night King and Bran. She pounces on him. The Night King intercepts her, grabs her by the throat. You hear her bones crunching. In this moment, I thought Arya was going to die after all we saw her in episodes 1 and 2, kind of having those last moments with a lot of her family. In episode 1, she reunites with Jon Snow, and it feels like she had come full circle, and this was going to be her swan song. But very similar, another callback to The Last Jedi, Star Wars Episode 8, when Rey is being held by one of the guards for Snoke. She has her lightsaber in one hand, she drops it to her free hand and stabs one of the guards. Very similar here. Arya has her blade in one hand, that hand is unavailable. She drops the blade, stabs the Night King in the chest, and he bursts into shards of ice. All the other White Walkers that are ice like him also burst, and all the other white zombies just collapse, and they're no longer in effect. So Arya kills the Night King, and the threat of the Long Night is now completely over. And Yeah, we'll get into that in just a bit. Other parts of the episode I didn't want to recap is when the trench is ignited and there's that standoff between the White Walkers and the ones defending Winterfell. The Night King gives a little bit of a signal, and they start killing themselves to put themselves over the flames to make a bridge. Very cool scene there, because it shows how smart the Night King is. If we're going to make another connection, we can make that connection to Avengers Infinity War, when we have that standoff between the Black Order with Proxima Midnight and Cull Obsidian and Corvus Glaive. They're all at the barrier of Wakanda. They're Black Panther, Captain America, and Black Widow go to confront them. They talk. Thanos will have nothing but dust and blood, all that. Eventually, the Outriders from Thanos' army charge at the barrier. Obviously, they can't get through, and if they try to get through, they'll be sliced in half. But what happens is they start getting sliced in half and stacking on top of each other enough so that it will create a rift in the barrier so that other Outriders could get in. So obviously, maybe not on purpose, that type of connection there, but I thought it was a cool callback, especially with Avengers Endgame having come out this past weekend, and with a lot of people having rewatched Infinity War in the past week, probably also made that connection. So I thought that was pretty cool. We're now going to get into the Fallen from this episode, and a note I kind of made from the Fallen is most, if not all of them, actually all of the Fallen that were on the side of the living died with a purpose. They didn't just die in battle. Beric Dondarrion, he died saving Arya. Obviously, he was the one who the Lord of Light had brought back, had resurrected multiple times. And he kind of says, what's the point of me being here? Why am I the one that gets resurrected so many times? And he kind of realizes his whole purpose is just in the end to save Arya, because Arya is the one that's going to kill the Night King. Edison Tollett, he's the first one to go, and he dies saving Sam. Sam is on the ground and being attacked by a White Walker. I thought this might be the end of Sam, but he gets saved, but then Ed unfortunately meets his untimely death. So Ed also dies saving someone, saving Sam. Jorah Mormont, towards the end of the episode, he dies saving Daenerys. Man, watching Daenerys in battle, it was pretty cringeworthy, because someone who talks this big game of, deserving the Iron Throne, it's her birthright, and, the Breaker of Chains, the Unburnt, all these crazy titles. When it comes down to the thick of it, excuse me for that sound effect. When it comes down to the thick of it, she's scared with a blade, and I don't think that's anything of her fault. I think that just shows how well she's written, that she's a better leader than she is a fighter. And even though she does try, which is noble enough rather than running away, it kind of felt similar to Tyrion in the sense that her brain is her strongest asset and her ability to lead rather than her fighting. And Jorah, he's given his loyalty to Daenerys for so long, and he dies saving her, which kind of is a nice poetic storybook ending for Jorah. And we'll see that actor, actually, Ian Glenn, go on to good things, as he's actually been cast as Bruce Wayne for Titans Season 2. Titans is a show based on the Teen Titans on the DC Universe streaming service. It's a live-action show with, Robin from Batman and Beast Boy, and if you remember the Titans Cartoon Network TV show, it's basically a live action version of that, and they cast Ian Glenn to play an older, most likely retired version of Batman for season 2. So even though Ian Glenn won't be in the last 3 episodes of Game of Thrones, that show's coming to a conclusion anyways, so he will have a chance to go on and be one of the few that can say he played Bruce Wayne in Titans Season 2. So still looking up for Ian Glenn, not so much for his character, Jorah. Lyanna Mormont, one of the younger characters. It was pretty brutal watching her die, but she also died with a purpose, killing a white giant. So a giant breaks into the castle at Winterfell, destroying everything, and it's being shot, but to no avail. The white giant grabs Lyanna and just is crushing her spine and her bones with his hand, and you hear the visual cue, and it's just, it's uncomfortable. And she has that dagger. I believe it's a dragon glass dagger, and she stabs it in the eye. A very cool callback that we'll actually get into in a little bit. So even though she dies in that scene, she dies with a purpose. And then we also have Melisandre, who doesn't die in battle, but she dies after the battle is over. And her whole purpose was actually pretty big. She ignited all the swords at the beginning. She ignited the trench that held them off for a little bit. And then she also motivated Arya with a cool callback that, again, we'll get into in our callback section. And our final living person that dies that, well, obviously a lot more died, but in terms of our main characters, Theon Greyjoy, he dies saving Bran. Another cool callback. Again, we'll get into that in the callback section, but his death, I thought, was very deserving. In terms of his character has kind of come full circle. Didn't really see a need for him to continue on further in this season, but he's one of the better characters in the show in terms of his redemption from someone that tried to take Winterfell to someone that dies defending one of Winterfell's sons. And then obviously the deaths, we get all of the White Walker army, everyone on the side of the Night King dies, but the two big ones are the Night King himself, rest in peace to my dude, long night forever, and Viserion, who is the Night King's dragon, turned from death in season 7, episode 7, I believe. The episode basically when Jon Snow and the Magnificent Seven go and capture a White Walker. All right, so now we're going to get into our callback section before I give my big thoughts on the episode, and these are just going to kind of be in a list. Don't need to go too much on them. Stick it with the pointy end. Arya gives that advice to Sansa when she's in the crypt when they're basically threatened, because when the Night King raises the dead that he's killed, he also raises the dead of people in the crypt, and even though they're basically bones at that point, they're still a threat. And Arya gives that blade to Sansa, and Sansa's kind of like, this isn't my realm, I'm more of a thinker rather than a fighter, and she gives her the blade. The same advice that Jon Snow gave to Arya in season 1, which I thought was a very cool callback. The spell Melisandre uses to ignite the swords, I'm going to try to pronounce it. It's Ixes Ono, I believe. It's the same spell that Beric uses to ignite his sword. However, Beric only needs to think the words for the spell to work, while Melisandre needs to say it out loud, and it translates to the Lord's Light, obviously, because the Lord of Light is what Beric, uses to come back and uses to ignite his sword. The Hound is traumatized by the fire, and that's a reference to his fear of fire, as his brother Gregor Clegane used fire to burn his face, and obviously the Hound survives, so fingers crossed for the Clegane Bowl. Hopefully we get that in the coming episodes when they march towards King's Landing. The giant that falls after being stabbed in the eye by Lyanna falls in the same place in Winterfell that another giant falls after being shot in the eye with an arrow by Ramsay Bolton in the Battle of the Bastards. A very cool callback to that big clash from an earlier season. Arya's reunion with Melisandre fulfills a prediction made by the Red Woman from season 3, saying that they would meet again. Melisandre's line, "What do we say to the god of death?" And then Arya responds with "not today." That's a callback to season 1 when Arya's sword instructor, Syrio Forel, says the same thing. In season 7, Bran gives Arya the dagger in the Godswood. It's the same spot that Arya kills the Night King, and that same blade was used by the Lannisters in an attempt to kill Bran in season 1. So a nice callback all the way back to season 1. The Night King is stabbed in the chest, the same area where he was stabbed with dragon glass during his creation by the Children of the Forest. And then finally, Theon tries to apologize to Bran for everything he's done, but Bran responds with the same line he gave Jaime in the previous episode: "Everything you did brought you to where you are now." So yeah, spent a good half hour recapping that episode of what went down and all the callbacks that happened. Now I kind of want to get into my thoughts. And I had time to sleep on it, so I do enjoy the episode more now, but my gut reaction after the episode was pretty negative, because what have we been building towards with the White Walkers and the Night King from literally season 1, episode 1? We barely get any scenes with them, little hints in every season. Eventually we get Hardhome, which was one of the coolest scenes with the Night King raising the dead. This was a conflict I was looking forward to, very excited for this to happen. in this season. I remember watching the season finale in season 7